Hello, everybody, and welcome to Milwaukee Baseball, the podcast that celebrates the history of our national pastime in the great city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm your host, Robert Cadera. Well, we've now passed the Memorial Day weekend. Traditionally, that's the first line of demarcation for each baseball season. And the Brewers continue to tread water and slowly sink in the National League Central Division. As we speak, the Crew is tied with the Cincinnati Reds at 28-28, with both teams seeking some traction to whittle into the divisional lead of the Chicago Cubs. The team is hoping for improved play as they face the Red Sox, and they have a very tough schedule following that. The Brewers can soon hope to have some of their pitchers return from the injured list. Aaron Civale returned a couple of days ago, and D.L. Hall is back as well. Brandon Woodruff could be back in another week, they say. Jose Quintana should begin a rehab stint, and he could join the team in early June. Meanwhile, down on the farm, number 3 overall prospect Jacob MISIOROWSKI has been sensational of late in AAA. He made 8 starts so far. He has a 3-0 record and a 1.46 ERA. In 49 innings, he's allowed only 25 hits. That's ridiculous. It raises the question, I think, of when, not if, the team brings up their top pitching prospect and slots him into the rotation. It would be ironic if MISIOROWSKI continues his success in the majors. The long list of injured starters get healthy, and then the team suddenly would find itself with a pitching surplus to trade at the deadline. But stranger things have happened. That may be the best way the team has to add some punch to their offense. There's no ready bats in the upper levels of the Brewers farm system. Looking at the rest of the division, Chicago has pulled away from the pack and has played 600 ball since the start of the season. They've had pitching injuries too, but then their lineup leads the big leagues in runs scored with 293 so far. That's almost a run and a half more per game than the Brewers have managed. Chicago's run differential leads the entire National League at plus 83, so the team is not a fluke. With more than 30% of the season now in the rearview mirror, the Brewers will need a miraculous turnaround to contend for the divisional crown this year. The Cardinals have been very hot lately, and they now sit in second place, 3 games behind the Cubs. But the Cardinals' starting pitching is running on fumes right now. And the Reds are one of those teams that just can't seem to get everything going at once. When they hit, the staff gives up a lot of runs. When the pitching is good, the bats go cold. Terry Francona must be wondering why he came back to manage them. So is there any hope for the Brewers this year? Well, they're only 3.5 games back from the final wild card spot in the standings, and there's still about 110 games left to play. If the starting pitchers come back from injury and produce, if Chourio has a second half like he did last year, if Yelich discovers the fountain of youth, if Ortiz finds where they've hidden his bat, if somebody gives the team even average play at third base, if Mitchell and Blake Perkins come back healthy, well, you never say never, do you? But the turnaround, if it's going to occur, has to begin soon. Well, my guess is that the club will wait and see how Brandon Woodruff performs and see how D.L. Hall and Jose Quintana are, and if they're ready to resume their spots in the rotation. If they bounce back over the next couple of weeks, MISIOROWSKI may still be brought up to add length to a bullpen that's been seriously overworked, really out of necessity. If any of those 3 falter in their recoveries, Jacob MISIOROWSKI could join the rotation? We'll have to see. Why did I choose to focus on MISIOROWSKI? Well, that's because there's no immediate help to the team's beleaguered offense. And the upper levels of the Brewers farm system is barren of hitters. They've got some great prospects deep down that are 2 or 3 years away. But after taking 2 of 3 against the surprisingly woeful Orioles in a home series last week, the Crew managed to split a 4-game series in Pittsburgh against the last-place Bucks, but those 2 losses were both winnable games, 1-run losses. With better hitting, especially with runners in scoring position, the Brewers could have easily swept that series, which is what they just did with the Boston Red Sox. So let's keep it up, guys. But to be realistic, the Brewers have only managed to split their last 10 games prior to the Red Sox series, and that dropped them 2 more games behind the still-hot Cubs. They've caused Milwaukee to lose ground in the standings to both the Cardinals and Cincinnati in the Central. That's not a way that a team gets back into a pennant race. Next month will be very telling, as between Memorial Day and the All-Star break, the Brewers face the most difficult portion of their schedule, by far. Now, over the next 6.5 weeks, the team has 43 games, 25 of them against teams with winning records, like the Dodgers, the Mets, the Cubs, the Cardinals, the Braves, and the Phillies. At least they got off to a good start sweeping the Red Sox. Improved play on both sides of the ball is needed, and right away, if the Brewers are to play meaningful games in August and September. Instead of just playing out the string in the 2025 season, nobody wants to see that. Time to turn back the clock now to when Milwaukee's National League team was the Braves, and the Braves always seemed to be in contention. One of the reasons for that success, of course, was the team's powerful lineup. Bruton, Logan, Aaron, Matthews, Adcock, Covington, Schoendienst, Crandall. Well, I wonder what a lineup like that would cost these days. But for many years, the Braves could also rely on a trio of great starting pitchers. Of course, Warren Spahn, Hall of Famer, nobody like him. And then there was Lou Burdette, not to mention the sometimes forgotten Bob Buell, or as Earl Gillespie used to call him, Bonnie Bob Buell. But as the 1960s began, that trio was getting long in the tooth. Buell was the first to lose his effectiveness, and he got traded to the Cubs at the start of the 1962 season. By that time, Burdette was also on the wane, and the next year he was dealt to the St. Louis Cardinals. That left Spahny as the last man standing. He would have had company, but from 1960 to 1963, the Braves had traded away a raft of young pitchers to acquire a middle infield that turned out to be Roy McMillan and Frank Bowling. And so it was goodbye to Joey J., who won 21 games in 61 and 62 for the Cincinnati Reds. Goodbye to Juan Pizarro, who won 61 games for the White Sox between 1961 and 64, and to Carl Willie, who was sold to the New York Mets in 1963 and went on to become their best starter, tossing 4 shutouts, fashioning a 3.1 ERA. Of course, we're talking the Mets here, so he did have a 9-14 record. The Braves slipped from contention in the early to mid-1960s because they fatally underestimated their need for young starting pitching as their big 3 aces aged. Yes, I know they had Tony Cloninger, Denver LeMaster, and Wade Blasingame, who all came up and showed promise. Cloninger even won 24 games for the final edition of the Milwaukee Braves in 1965. LeMaster won as many as 17 games in 1964, and Blasingame went 16-10 the same year Cloninger won those 24 games. But the real reason that the Braves' pitching fell off as the 1960s progressed was really not their fault. We can't fault Sponny for his rapid decline after his stellar 23 wins in 1963. After all, he was 43 by the time his legs gave out. No, the real reason the staff thinned out was because of a tragic accident that is now mostly forgotten. Cloninger, LeMaster, and Blasingame were considered good prospects, but they weren't the best of the Braves' minor league hopefuls. That title belonged to a big right-hander named Jerry HUMMITZSCH. I mentioned last month that we would soon be taking a look back at the semi-pro baseball scene in the 1950s and the 1960s in Milwaukee. And Jerry HUMMITZSCH was arguably the best semi-pro player to come out of all of those programs. The Braves certainly had their eye on him, but he was otherwise under the radar to many scouts. As Jerry's high school team in North Sheboygan didn't have a baseball team. Now, the Braves certainly noticed him because he starred in the Silver Sluggers program and he pitched in their All-Star game at Milwaukee County Stadium. In 1959, Pittsburgh right-hander Elroy Face had developed something he called a forkball, and he made it into a national sensation. He won 19 games and lost 1 as a reliever. And Jerry HUMMITZSCH had quickly mastered it to go along with a 95-mile-an-hour fastball, something that Elroy could only dream of. After spending a year in junior college in Colorado, HUMMITZSCH decided to turn pro, and the Milwaukee Braves beat all the other teams, signing him to a $30,000 bonus. And they sent Jerry to open the 1961 season in Eau Claire, the sea-level Northern League team where they started Henry Aaron. Jerry soon discovered that professional ball players didn't swing at pitches out of the strike zone. His arm was impressive. Alas, his control was not, kind of like MISIOROWSKI. And he walked 88 in 105 innings pitched. The next year was more of the same. And people were asking, would HUMMITZSCH ever learn to control his really impressive stuff? Well, things certainly improved for Jerry in 1963 in the Texas League, where he won 10 games, had an ERA of 3.13, and dropped his walks to 67 in 144 innings while still whiffing a batter per frame. Milwaukee scout Jim Fanning certainly noticed. He stated, quote, "What a future this kid has. He's fantastic," unquote. Fanning marveled at how close HUMMITZSCH was to being ready for the major leagues. In March of 1964, Jerry HUMMITZSCH was the talk of the Braves spring training camp. Manager Bobby Bragan wanted to take HUMMITZSCH north with the team that spring, but he was overruled by McHale and others in the Braves brass who wanted Jerry to work on his control before exposing him to major league hitters. And so Jerry HUMMITZSCH started the 1964 season with a 1.22 ERA, 3 complete games, and a shutout in his first 5 starts alone. He'd walked only 6 batters in those 5 starts, a sign that everything was coming together. His final minor league start on May 22nd was special. His fastball was crackling, and the forkball was finding the lower reaches of the strike zone. Fanning, who was at the game, said he'd never seen Jerry look better, and he'd been in the stands for HUMMITZSCH's no-hitter the year before. After tossing 10 shutout innings of 3-hit ball, Hummitz took matters into his own hands. He led off the bottom of the 10th with a double and eventually scored the walk-off winning run on a one-out single that followed. Could the expected phone call from the Milwaukee Braves front office be far behind? Well, the next day was the 21st birthday for Jerry's roommate, a guy named Walt Horiniak. You might have heard of him. He played Major League Ball and became a hitting coach. Early that morning, Jerry and Walt decided to spend the day fishing before returning for the night game they had scheduled. Unfortunately, Hummitzsch's Pontiac Bonneville convertible missed a turn on the twisting country road outside of town. The car knocked over 4 guardrails, and it flipped over before stopping 200 feet, where it skidded off the road. Fortunately, Walt Horiniak was thrown free of the car, but still he suffered severe lacerations and multiple internal injuries. Jerry Hummitzsch, alas, was trapped beneath the car and died instantly. A moment of silence was observed at the Braves game against the St. Louis Cardinals that night. Team president John McHale and manager Bobby Bragan attended Jerry's funeral 2 days later, with Warren Spahn and Joe Torre among the pallbearers. What might have been. Jerry Hummitzsch stands as the greatest Milwaukee Braves prospect who never made it to the major leagues. A trophy was designed called the Jerry Hummitzsch Memorial Trophy to be given each year, awarded to the most valuable player in each year's Silver Slugger game at Milwaukee County Stadium. We can only wonder how the Braves' fortunes might have changed if Jerry Hummitzsch had gotten that phone call in 1964 and lived to head up a rotation with Cloninger, LeMaster, and Blasingame behind him. After all, the Braves only missed winning the pennant that season by 5 games. On our show next month, we'll talk to a guy who also pitched in the Silver Slugger game back then, and to his friend and a former coach of mine who coached semi-pro ball in Milwaukee in the early 1960s. Don't forget, please click on the like button and subscribe button, and you'll be notified for that show and for all other episodes of Milwaukee Baseball. That's it for Milwaukee Baseball this month. My name is Robert Cadera. I want to thank you for stopping by, and I hope to see you on our next trip around the bases.